Thank you very much. So we will have more time for more questions with Mrs. LaRouche. But I think given just the time restraints on both of their participation, I'd like to, if possible, then introduce now Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. Many people here are familiar with him and his wife's work. They both have been working together now for over 40 years on the question of human development. And so I'm sure everyone's interested to hear what he has to say.
All right. Well, Helga's covered a lot of territory right now, and it's impressive to me because it takes the burden off me, so that, as you can imagine, for example, there are several problems which are specific to the present situation. One is obviously a strategic situation, which Helga has touched upon in various aspects. There's also the question of what is the alternative to the collapse of civilization, which is now ongoing. I'm speaking specifically of the economy of the United States, the economy of Europe, and to a large degree the transatlantic region. Now, what's happened in the transatlantic region, which had been in a former period of time the great driver of progress, the United States, especially the United States at its peak as an economy, but since the time of some of our greatest leaders, we have been sinking down. We've been in a state of decline permanently from the time of the death of John F. Kennedy until the present time. That is, the death and the assassination of John F. Kennedy marked the beginning of a great collapse in the United States, of the economy, and of the morality of our people. The same thing happened somewhat in Europe, Western and Central Europe, the same kind of thing. Now, what we have, therefore, is a question, given the degree of collapse of the economy, of the industries, of the ability to produce in the United States in particular, as in Western and Central Europe, we've reached a point where this system, in its present form, cannot survive. We've reached a breakdown point in the system. The question is, how can we launch a recovery of the United States immediately, but also the transatlantic region and the world as a whole? How can we do that? Well, you look at, there's some good points in Asia which are very important, such as in China. China has a great potential now if it is encouraged and enabled to do that. Other nations in the Pacific region, some of them at least, also have a similar contribution to make. They are still on the upgrade, still making progress. China is most notable in this case. And it, of course, has been accelerated by the question of the military defense of China, which is threatened not by anybody else, but by the British system, Anglo-Dutch system, and by some degrees in the United States itself. So therefore, is it possible, given the fact that the trend of collapse in the United States, across the Atlantic into Europe, is it possible that these nations can recover from the collapse which is fully underway now? And that's the challenge. And what I want to focus on is essentially an approach to dealing with this crisis. There is no chance of a spontaneous recovery of the U.S. economy at this time. There would have to be the elimination of this current president of the United States, as of the Bush family representatives earlier. From the time of young Bush entering office the United States has been in an accelerating rate of general collapse. We no longer have significant industry. We have some local industries which are leftovers of a general wreckage. We are now at a point, as of this week, that a factor of active genocide has been introduced to the victims in the U.S. population. This is the new law put through in the sponsorship of the current president. As long as that policy exists, the situation of the United States would be hopeless. That is, of the people of the United States. The hyperinflation is only a factor in this thing. So therefore, the question is, where can the recovery of economy and nations occur? My suggestion is there are some indications of ways in which we could integrate the recovery of nations such as the United States, together with the Pacific region, because the Pacific region has not collapsed in the degree that the United States economy has collapsed, or the American economy of the Americans, for example. So therefore, that's interesting. We also have India is in a better state of affairs than the United States too. We have other nations, groups of nations, which have significant potential for some greater or lesser degree of recovery. Now, despite those limitations, there are two basic opportunities that stand before us now. One is what's called NWAPA. That's the great water project, which is the greatest project which stands before us now inside the economy of the United States and also Canada. That would be positive, but it's not being done. We've also had technologies which we have proposed. They have not been done. This is under Bush and under NWAPA. The United States is literally going to hell on this case. So therefore, what's the solution? How do we, apart from moving Obama out of the presidency, which would be a great boon to the world, and the United States in particular, what are the means that we could use now, which would be a starting point of reference for a general recovery of civilization on the planet? One thing, of course, is a proper view of Mars, of space exploration, of defense of space against large rocks, which we can, if they, in some cases, if they were hit Earth, one of these would actually terminate the existence of the human species on Earth. So therefore, these kinds of problems and similar kinds of problems are correlatives which indicate that there's something we have to do to defend the very existence of the people of the United States and of the world, and so forth. Also, the Mars thing has a very significant importance in this process. But the main thing here is, what's the immediate action? Well, since the beginning of the 1970s, we had the achievement of a provable case for thermonuclear fusion. This was done by, I was part of one of these teams involved in this thing during that time. But this thing was put under wraps. It was crushed. It was held back. We have never really done either what was called NWAPA, the great North American water power system. That's a great, which can still be done and must be done. We also have other problems of the same kind. But the main one is also the fact that China, in particular, and adjoining nations in Asia have not collapsed during the period that the European system has collapsed, the U.S. economy has collapsed, the South American economies are disintegrating, more or less. The tragedy of Africa, which is still a great tragedy, says, where can we go? What can we touch which would save the future of mankind? Well, already recently, we've had a collapse of income decreed by Obama. Obama's program, if implemented, and it is being implemented, prescribes genocidal collapse of large sections of the U.S. population. That's already in place under Obama. Now, if we were to be fortunate enough to remove Obama from office, then we have a number of options. There are things we can start and do, which would be very useful, but we have virtually no significant depth of industry and no significant depth of agriculture. We are not producing and cannot presently produce a sufficient amount of agricultural product to maintain the population of the people of the United States. These are the kinds of problems that must be faced now. Obama must be removed from office. Without his being removed from office, there's no hope for anything but a holocaust of one degree or another for the U.S. population. Well, let's suppose Obama is removed judiciously and for judicious reasons. Then we have a blank slate because we don't have industry of any significance anymore. All our great industries have been collapsed, disbanded. Our people not only have been unemployed, but more and more of them have lost the ability to produce. Their brains, their so forth, are not developed as they should have been. They've been crushed. And this last bill that was rammed through by Obama is the signal of an action which will cause an acceleration of the death rate in the U.S. population. So what's the solution? Well, I say get rid of Obama. Have him impeached, as he should be. Then we do have a possible option. Now, one of the options is, as I've mentioned, is NWAPA. But NWAPA could not be implemented under the present economic circumstances inside the United States. It could be implemented in design. There are still a few aging people who know how to do what has to be done to install NWAPA. But there are not many of them, and those who exist have no significant opportunity to do anything for NWAPA. So the United States is now dying. It's a dying economy. And there will be soon, if we don't stop this, mass death to follow. All right. What could break this? Well, we have one technology which I became familiar with back in the early 1970s. And that is the development of thermonuclear fusion. Now, thermonuclear fusion has been on the table since the early part of the 1970s, but has not been implemented except in very limited token ways. And more, there's an absolute systemic suppression of clear understanding of what that would mean. But going to this higher level of intensity, of energy flux density, which that represents, which is the greatest leap available to us for all mankind. But since the early 1970s, there has been a ban on any significant application of that kind of thermonuclear fusion. There have been some small token things which do not rise to the level of having the significance of a driver for the world economy. China, however, is not bankrupt. China is not in great shape relative to what we used to set as standards of progress, but China has a vitality with limitations, admittedly. We have also other parts of Asia which, as a part of the Asian or Trans-Pacific region, do have some capability for rising to the challenge of thermonuclear fusion. And only thermonuclear fusion is an adequate instrument for rescuing the world and the world's population from the present crisis. So that now we will not be able to achieve, in my best estimate, a full-throated thermonuclear fusion in much more than less than a decade. It would take a decade or more. We used to talk about 30 years to realize thermonuclear fusion. Today, I believe we could do better. We could do better by cooperation among a great number of nations, doing experimental work to go into the phase of operation of thermonuclear fusion. That would enable us to begin to halt the rate of collapse inside the world economy generally, and to restore some degree of actual significant progress. The first objective has to be to hold the line, to stop the flow into disaster. And whatever we can do in that direction, whatever means we can, whatever that means, it should be done. It should be done immediately. Because the first thing is we have to realize we have entire populations in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere who are totally incompetent in respect of these kinds of economies, even simpler forms of economy. And that's where we stand right now. So that's my key issue. The increase of the energy flux density, as expressed in terms of thermonuclear fusion, applied to all applications of industry and environment and so forth, is the essential only solution for pulling the world as a whole, the world economy as a whole, especially the transatlantic region, to saving those nations. Frankly, you cannot save those nations without such measures. Even though it may take 10 years or more to get thermonuclear fusion actually operating on the level necessary, even experimentally. Nonetheless, the fact that we are committed to developing that technology means that we have an active chance. We can take areas like China, which still has the facility to make progress in that direction. Some other nations of Asia also have that. India has a certain degree of obvious capability. But the problem is the collapse of the transatlantic region is one of the greatest catastrophes. But why did it happen? It happened because forces that feared the United States and feared more than that what the United States had represented at its best. The destruction of that intellectual capability, the demoralization of the citizens of the United States, has brought us to the point that we are headed toward a general breakdown crisis. And what was started this week in terms of the Obama program for gradual genocide against the poor people of the United States is a warning sign. Take into account the fact that the food supply, the generation of food supply of the U.S. population is now on the negative side and getting worse rapidly. So this is what faces us most essentially. Those things. So NWAPA is key. Thermonuclear fusion, as I've indicated, is key. Now, what my approach is specifically this. I've proposed, with my associates and others, that we recognize that the region of the United States to the west of the Mississippi River is one of the great catastrophic areas. That's where some of the worst collapse is occurring. That's where a great deal of our food supply is disappearing. And you know some of the things in California also is similar types of collapse in this region, which had once had a great prosperity. The southern part of California had a great prosperity, despite all the faults in the system. And now it's tragic. So therefore, the only chance is to get us started in the direction of restoring a commitment to progress, energy flux density in progress. And I know we can do that. The question is, where's the will to back up the realization? The problem had been that the United States and Europe, Western Europe, were particular targets for destruction of the capability of productivity during this whole period. It started essentially with, George W. Bush Jr., who was one of our great catastrophes. Obama is the worst catastrophe ever to hit the United States. As we keep Obama in office, we're dead. The United States is dead. So this man must be impeached, Glass-Steagall must be reestablished, and we must have applied energy flux density programs for building up food supply, for rebuilding up production, for initiating production where it no longer exists, and defending our population's lives against the terrible conditions which have been put upon us successively by George W. Bush Jr. and by Obama. These are the two curses. If we have that kind of program we need and start it, we can win, we can survive. But we have to recognize that since the death of John F. Kennedy as president, the United States economy has been in a successively stage of decline, collapse. Don't kid yourself. This economy has collapsed since that time, it's at different rates at different times, but now it's full. The United States is doomed unless we find a change in direction of our economy. And the best thing is to tie ourselves closely into sections of Asia where they may not be perfect by our old standards. They are necessary as a part of finding the resources to begin to rebuild our economy and put our people back to work, get back into production. And the first thing to do is shut down Wall Street and shut down everything that represents that. Because as long as Wall Street is bleeding the economies of the United States itself is doomed. A way to do that, Glass-Steagall. Put Glass-Steagall into power immediately. and the tide can be turned. It will not be turned automatically, but it can be returned if we do that. That's where we stand. And since Helga's covered a lot of area, I'll now pass it back to you.